Hey everybody, welcome back to Sip&Talk. I'm Joe. And as always, I'm ready to dive into some seriously juicy info with you all today. It's like we're mixing up a knowledge cocktail here. Strong stuff, but oh, so smooth going down.
And I'm Sunny, your friendly neighborhood fact checker. I'll make sure we get all the ingredients right. Speaking of mixing things up, you know it's always a good blend? Travel whiskey and discovering awesome new things. You have to check out our friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life.
Yeah, Mickey's the best. He's always got something cool going on. And I have to say, I am just completely mind blown today. Like, you will not believe the geopolitical visual that I just saw crossing the wire.
Oh boy. What are we looking at?
Okay, so Sanai Takaishi from Japan and Lee Jae-myung from South Korea. They're actually sitting down together at a table in Seoul.
Wait, really? Looking at those two figures, I mean, the political friction there is just intense. We are talking about opposite ends of the spectrum here.
It is beyond intense. I mean, Takaichi is this incredibly staunch Japanese conservative, right? And Lee Jae-myung is a South Korean progressive who, basically built this immense political capital on a very hardline stance regarding historical grievances.
Right.
So putting them in a room together to discuss mutual security is, honestly, it's like pairing spicy hot pot with mint chocolate chip ice cream, or like a Texas chainsaw with a traditional Japanese kimono. It's just absurdly mismatched. It goes against all their natural political instinct.
I totally see the analogy, but let's ground this for all our Sip and Talkers tuning in today, because this wasn't just some reluctant performative photo op. They have officially upgraded their bilateral security dialogue to the vice ministerial level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. According to the reporting from the Japan Times, that is the absolute highest working level connection we have seen between these two administrations recently. And it forces a very uncomfortable reality to the surface.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, entire nations do not just casually put away generations of deep-seated historical ledgers. The survival instinct has to kick in. Whatever is casting a shadow over Tokyo and Seoul must be terrifying enough to make sitting at that shared table their only viable option.
Right, which is our exact mission for Sip and Talk today. We need to unpack the security dilemma layer by layer. We are, stripping away all the political posturing, completely avoiding taking any sides, and just objectively decoding the massive mechanical pressures forcing this alliance.
You mentioned the survival instinct. And the absolute bedrock of that survival is energy and trade. For Japan and South Korea, the reality is fundamentally geographical. They thrive under the umbrella of open sea lines of communication, or SLOCs, as they call them.
Yeah, and we aren't just talking about, delayed cargo ships full of consumer electronics here. We were talking about the structural mechanics of survival.
Exactly.
Let's just trace a tanker of liquefied natural gas for a second.
Yeah.
It leaves the Middle East, travels through the Strait of Malacca, navigates the South China Sea, and passes the Taiwan Strait just to reach Tokyo or Seoul.
Right, because neither country has massive domestic energy reserves.
Oh.
If those specific shipping corridors are restricted due to military blockades or, regional conflict, it isn't a matter of a mild economic recession. The physical energy grids fail.
Literally.
The lights literally go out. You cannot simply fly in enough natural gas on cargo planes to power a sprawling metropolis like Tokyo. It's mathematically impossible.
And when you look at the military temperatures continuously rising in those exact corridors, a disruption to that maritime logistics chain is, it's no longer viewed as a hypothetical if. It is structurally viewed as a when.
Yeah, but if a maritime blockade is the slow death of an economy, the immediate visceral threat that shrinks their timeline is what is happening with nuclear deterrence. Walk me through the military escalation, because, we've had tension on the Korean peninsula for decades. Why is the panic setting in right now?
Okay, it basically comes down to the mechanical failure of the historical deterrence model, specifically regarding North Korea. Historically, we dealt with liquid-fueled rockets, right?
Right.
And liquid fuel is highly corrosive. It's volatile.
Yeah.
You cannot just leave a missile fully fueled in a silo for months on end.
So preparing a launch was basically a massive, highly visible chemistry experiment.
Exactly. It took days of convoys, fueling trucks, personnel moving around. U.S. and allied satellites could easily track the heat signatures and the massive logistics footprint.
Giving them a heads up.
Yeah, that gave Seoul and Tokyo days of early warning to prepare interceptors or, if needed, launch preemptive strikes. But North Korea has rapidly advanced to solid fuel technology.
Which fundamentally alters the entire kill chain.
Total.
Because a solid fuel missile is preloaded. It's like a giant weaponized firecracker. It can be rolled out of a mountain tunnel on a mobile launcher and fired in minutes. There's virtually no early warning window anymore.
None.
Add multi-warhead capabilities to that, where one missile breaks apart into multiple re-entry vehicles in the atmosphere, and it mathematically overwhelms point defense systems like Patriot batteries.
Now, let me throw a really blunt question your way, because I think this is the psychological core of the issue. Combine that shrinking response time with the political climate in the United States.
Right.
Like, we hear figures like Trump leaning heavily into isolationist rhetoric. Are Tokyo and Seoul secretly terrified about the actual reliability of the U.S. nuclear umbrella?
Honestly, it is a completely logical fear. The entire premise of a defense treaty relies on absolute, unwavering trust in mutual defense. If you are sitting in the defense ministry in Seoul, you are actively running a grim calculation.
Yeah.
Like, if a multi-warhead missile is on the launch pad, would Washington actually be willing to trade Los Angeles or Seattle to save a regional ally?
Yeah.
If there is even a 1% margin of doubt in that equation, you have to start making friends with the neighbor you usually argue with. You just have to build localized resilience.
But defending against those advanced missile systems requires a financial and technological scale that forces us right into the third pressure. The brutal economic reality of the tech Iron Curtain. The global supply chain isn't just shifting, it is being aggressively fractured.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at the Bloomberg data on the semiconductor supply chain restructuring. When you look at the mechanics of the CHIPS Act coming out of the U.S., it is structurally designed to force countries to pick an ecosystem. It relies heavily on extraterritoriality.
Which means what, in practice?
It means even if a foreign factory uses a tiny fraction of American intellectual property or software in its manufacturing process, they are legally bound by U.S. export restrictions.
Wow. And in the race to dominate artificial intelligence, Japan and South Korea realize they are holding two separated halves of a very fragile golden ticket. Like, let's break down the mechanics of building a high-end microchip. Japan completely dominates the upstream supply chain.
Right.
They control the hyper-specialized chemical materials, things like photoresists, that are absolutely necessary to print microscopic circuits onto silicon.
But Japan doesn't have the massive cutting-edge fabrication plants to actually manufacture those 3-nanometer chips at global scale. That is South Korea's domain. Separated, both nations are entirely vulnerable to supply chain weaponization. United, they control the indispensable choke points of the future tech economy.
They are forced to integrate because neither can afford to build a fully independent closed-loop supply chain from scratch. Just look at the macroeconomic constraints. According to the Ministry of Finance, Japan's government debt has hit a staggering record 1,343 trillion yen.
Yeah, when your debt-to-GDP ratio is that heavy, you are structurally trapped. You cannot simply spend your way to regional safety by endlessly printing money to build an independent military and a fully subsidized tech sector. The mathematical reality requires burden sharing.
So they are forced into this defensive posture by severe logistical, military, and economic realities. But we have to ask the critical question, who is generating that pressure? Because the data heavily points toward Beijing.
I see the military and economic metrics pointing that way, but if we are really doing an objective look at this, we have to flip the board, because if you ask Beijing, they aren't the aggressors in this dynamic at all.
Interesting.
In their geopolitical reality, they are the ones being backed into a corner. We need to examine both of these realities simultaneously to really understand the friction.
Okay, let's unpack the Chinese perspective first, what we might call the view of the suppressed riser. Their foundational logic is heavily rooted in the century of humiliation, which was a historical period where foreign powers militarily dictated their domestic reality. So today, when Beijing looks at a map of the first island chain stretching from Japan down past Taiwan to the Philippines, they don't see a defensive perimeter.
They see a physical wall. They see a U.S.-led Asian NATO designed specifically for strategic containment.
Yes. From their vantage point, consider how those tech bans actually function mechanically. Cutting off their access to high-end microchips isn't viewed as a protective security measure. It is viewed as a deliberate, coordinated attempt to block their sovereign right to technological and economic development.
It's an economic blockade to them.
Exactly. Combine that with massive multi-carrier military drills happening just off their coastline, and it structurally looks like aggressive encirclement.
It is the feeling of a glass ceiling being installed just as your economy is hitting its historical stride. But we have to contrast that historical anxiety with the mechanical reality on the ground today. From the perspective of Tokyo and Seoul, the threatened order keepers, their anxiety isn't about blocking someone else's development. It is about unilateral changes to the rules-based order.
Right.
They look at the SIPRI data tracking global military spending, and they see China's defense budget maintaining double-digit growth heading into 2026.
And we really have to explain how that budget translates into mechanical reality. It isn't just numbers on a ledger. We are talking about factual daily friction here. Chinese military aircraft frequently enter the Air Defense Identification Zones, or ADIZ, of neighboring countries.
Which we should clarify for the audience, an ADIZ isn't sovereign airspace. It is a designated early warning buffer over international waters. But structurally, when a foreign jet enters that zone, the defending country is forced to scramble interceptor jets to escort them.
And that's not cheap.
No. Scrambling jets cost millions of dollars, exhausts pilots, and literally burns out the airframes of the jets. It is an intentional, grinding war of attrition.
Add to that the maritime reality. You have massive fleets of fishing vessels, often backed by a maritime militia, operating in the exclusive economic zones of other nations, which severely depletes regional food security. And, we cannot ignore the 2022 incident where 5 ballistic missiles landed directly in Japan's exclusive economic zone, like the specific waters where Japan holds sovereign economic rights.
Right, and this dynamic perfectly illustrates the zero-trust nature of a security dilemma. Let's run a thought experiment to test the mechanics of this mutual fear. Imagine if the U.S. completely withdrew its military presence from Okinawa and South Korea tomorrow, just packed up the bases, dissolved the treaties, and left the region entirely. Would that create a vacuum of peace?
Absolutely not. It would trigger immediate, unmitigated panic. Without the U.S. nuclear umbrella providing a guarantee, Japan and South Korea would likely pursue their own independent nuclear weapons programs within months to replace the lost deterrence. You would see massive, rapid nuclear proliferation.
Okay, now flip the scenario. What if Beijing announced tomorrow that it was permanently halving its military budget and recalling all its naval fleets to port? Would Japan and Korea dismantle their missile defense systems?
Never, because the trust deficit is absolute. They would assume it was a trap, like a deceptive maneuver to hide real capabilities before a surprise offensive.
That is the tragic mechanism of the security dilemma. When foundational trust is at zero, every purely defensive move you make is structurally interpreted by your neighbor as an offensive preparation. You buy a shield, and your neighbor genuinely believes you are preparing to swing a sword.
It's kind of like an ex-boyfriend claiming he was wronged in the past, so now he feels he's legally allowed to fly drones over your backyard, throw firecrackers in your pool, and claim it's just peaceful reunification.
That is a wild analogy, but I get it. But conversely, we have to remind ourselves that when the U.S. and its allies conduct those massive military drills to Beijing, it just looks like a neighborhood gang surrounding their house with bats.
That's completely fair. And this structural distrust bleeds far past military hardware and semiconductor supply chains. It fundamentally dictates how the citizens of these nations actually perceive reality itself. The military borders have morphed into cognitive borders. We are actively observing the ultimate cognitive war.
Break down the mechanics of this information clash for me. Let's start the information defense argument from the Chinese perspective. Because in open societies, we view information as a neutral utility, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But from Beijing's perspective, information is a highly weaponized vector. They view massive Western media conglomerates, whether it's CNN, the BBC, or tech platforms like YouTube, as instruments of cultural hegemony.
So in that specific framework, the Great Firewall isn't engineered as a prison to keep people in. It is engineered as a bulletproof vest. It acts as an information tariff to protect their domestic narrative market share in the exact same way a country might place tariffs on foreign imports to protect its domestic auto industry.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, they argue this is a necessary mechanism to prevent foreign-funded instability or color revolutions. In their view, citizens in allied Western countries are the ones actually being brainwashed by an unregulated monopolistic stream of U.S. ideology masquerading as a free press.
I understand the defensive logic of an information tariff, but let's apply a stress test to that argument. The counter-model is the open society, which relies on an evolutionary view of information. In an open system, a citizen has the agency to open a browser, read a CNN report, cross-reference it with Japanese state media, and then read an English translation of Chinese state media all on the same screen. They can actively triangulate reality.
Yes. The evolutionary model relies entirely on the citizen's agency. So, the argument that the Great Firewall is merely a protective vest falls apart mechanically. It is like a parent locking their kids inside a house, forcing them to watch heavily edited home videos and then pointing out the window telling those kids that the children playing freely outside are the ones being manipulated.
Right.
I mean, if a political system and its ideology are vastly superior, why make it a legal offense to use a VPN to go verify that superiority for yourself?
That is a very sharp point about agency. A system that legally requires a physical wall to prevent competing ideas from entering structurally implies that its own narrative is inherently fragile. However, and I have to play devil's advocate here, I have to provide a severe reality check on our own systems.
Uh-oh. Lay it on me.
We deeply pride ourselves on this open society model, but we completely ignore the mechanics of algorithmic echo chambers in the West.
Oh, the invisible walls.
Precisely. We don't have a state-mandated, government-enforced firewall. But the tech companies in Silicon Valley have engineered incredibly sophisticated invisible firewalls that meticulously curate our feeds. They are mathematically optimized to show us exactly what reinforces our existing biases because outrage and ideological agreement drive the highest user engagement.
Wow.
We have the technical ability to cross-reference multiple viewpoints, but structurally, the algorithms are designed to ensure we almost never do.
That is a brilliant counterpoint. We might not face a state firewall, but we construct our own personalized algorithmic firewalls every single time we block an opposing view or exclusively consume media that perfectly validates our worldview. The illusion that we are perfectly objectively informed is an incredible danger in itself.
Which really brings us back down from these massive geopolitical theories to our actual daily lives. We've decoded vice-ministerial dialogues, the extraterritoriality of supply chains, and the mechanics of cognitive warfare. But why does this actually matter to the listener tuning in right now?
Well, it matters because the ultimate goal of all of this tension, the very reason these historically opposed leaders are forcing themselves to sit down at a table in Seoul, is to protect normal, everyday existence.
Yeah.
They are desperately trying to stabilize a region so that we can maintain global free trade, so we can travel across borders without anxiety, so we can stream our favorite K-dramas and, just eat a bowl of authentic ramen without the looming threat of a supply chain collapse or a catastrophic regional war.
It demonstrates that even the most entrenched, historically bitter political rivals can engineer a narrow path to coexistence when they are confronted with a massive, shared structural challenge. It forces pragmatism over the past.
Exactly.
And that leads to the challenge we want to leave you with today. The truth often lies somewhere in the middle, and it really is a race of fear. In an era where everyone wants to pull you into an information bubble, independent thinking is a brave act.
It really is.
So, ask yourself, have you looked at data or opinions completely opposite to your own stance today? Seeing the world clearly isn't about picking a side. It's about standing firm when the storm hits.
That is perfectly said. And as always, we want to explicitly state that Sip&Talk does not criticize or discriminate against any nation or people. Our goal is simply to present objective facts from all sides to encourage critical thinking.
And a quick disclaimer. While we did discuss tech and supply chains today, none of this is financial or investment advice.
Yes, please keep your portfolio safe. And hey, if you enjoyed this conversation, please remember to subscribe to Sip&Talk.
Oh, and speaking of subscribing, in a much lighter, cheerful vein, you guys have to go check out and subscribe to our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickey to Life.
Oh my gosh, yes.
He just dropped some brand new travel vlogs, and they're fantastic. A great way to unwind after all this heavy geopolitical talk.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.